Finally, we have returned to fantasy football normalcy. Week 1 is down. We're looking into week 2. Now, I do apologize. In previous years, you've gotten to listen to my rambling about your team in my draft recap. Just didn't have time to do that this year. You probably noticed with the different background. Kind of was having to deal with something. No worries, though. We are back on track. From here on in, we should be okay. Knock on something. But all it means is I have more to say in each week by week wrap up, maybe. I don't know. Maybe you'll just get sick of me a little bit later in the year. But either way, let's get right to it with our week 1 results. I feel like after week 1, it is a yearly tradition. Are we overreacting or underreacting? Now, it might be hard not to have these instincts, especially if you saw a lot of Yahoo Red, but if you looked around, most people were well under their predicteds. In fact, a lot of people were under their predicteds and still won because the other person had some of the real people that caused issues this week. If you were lucky enough to be in the green, you probably won unless you just happened to play the other person who was in the green. But this is not new. This time last year, if you remember, we were talking about how some offenses were down and people were touting people like Derek Carr in the Saints offense who came out of the gates running, and people were fighting to get any waiver wire person they could on that Saints offense, and that didn't exactly hold water. So for those who spent a lot of fab dollars on a Cleveland Brown, just bear that in mind. Now, there are some things to obviously panic about. Worthy with the huge injury, and I think on Yahoo it was up to about 90 or just over 90% of people that had Worthy lost week 1, so I get why you're upset. But there are the AJ Browns. If you had any piece of Cincy's offense or Detroit's offense, you're probably wondering what exactly to do. But there were a number of people that I think are going to be strong later on that just fell north, or sorry, I should say south, of that Daniel Jones Mendoza line of week 1. So I don't know if that's really the point to kind of peak or valley on here, but what I do think is pretty epic, and just like a young adolescent male who maybe, if dates are still a thing, goes on a date, and I don't know, we're in that paradigm because I think after week 1 we may have peaked a little bit early. We might have had the game of the week, or the year I should say, on Sunday night. The Bills and Ravens, I'm assuming most people, if you like football, you either watched it or you're at least keeping tabs with it. Also too, because of fantasy, there's a lot of people up there that were putting up monster fantasy numbers, and it probably stands to reason that if you were in the Yahoo Green, you probably had a decent piece of this, or realistically one of the two quarterbacks. I think even within that game, we see over and under reactions. Calling this a meltdown just because Derrick Henry, who had an epic game, and I know I haven't played professional sports, so according to some people on ESPN, I shouldn't be commenting on this, but he had an amazing game. He just fumbled. And realistically, that's what that meltdown was, a fumble and a 3 and out. Mismanagement of clock, sure, but it's week 1. If we're going to talk about meltdowns, I mean, this isn't even the worst Ravens-Bills meltdown that was the worst in the last few months. We can't forget that Andrews, failed catch there. And I know last year seems like epic, way longer than we think ago, but do have a bit of a memory here. Anywho, it is just a unique one. I mean, it was a scoregami, 41-40. It was the first time, apparently, if you scored 40 points and you rushed for over 235 yards, you were 277-0, and that would be now 277-1. So we do have a lot to focus on there, but realistically, just as football fans, we might have watched the two best players going after it in hopefully what's a setup for something later on down the line. Now, it is pretty fun to talk about two teams that aren't the Chiefs and the AFC as being epic, but realistically, there was not that many other games that were really like, what was game number 2? I mean, I guess the Monday nighter having the comeback Minnesota Chicago was pretty fun, but it wasn't like a really well played game. And if you really want to get all millennial down on Caleb Williams and you read the Wickersham kind of series of articles, you know what I'm talking about. If not, I'll probably refer to those later. That was okay. I mean, it was a fun finish. Are we really looking at Jets Pittsburgh as game number 2 in terms of exciting finishes or well played games? Because I don't want to say that either. So really, it was just focusing on this one. I think that made me miss football, and hopefully that was the same for you if you got to watch it, especially if you had Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. And Josh Allen owners were sweating until probably the end, but then they ended up being kind of the important key pieces to keep yourself in the green and to keep yourself from overreacting. How that's going to carry into week 2, I'm not really sure, but at least we've got a couple pillars down. We know it's some of the players already, and then we just got to see who bounces back in week 2 and who doesn't. I'm trying my best to make these segments a little bit shorter this year just for my own purposes, so let's see how I did. But more importantly, let's see how the league did in week 1 before we jump to week 2. To further prove my point about the Yahoo Green being a rarity, Pamela was only like under 10 points over her predicted, and yet she was our highest scorer this week at just under 140. I'm willing to bet that's one of the lower top scores of the year, but Who knows? Now, how she did it, she did have a bunch of people that registered on our kind of top 5. She had the defense 1 started in Denver, running back 2 in Bijan, and wide receiver 5 in Pakanakua. But I think overall, aside from Tua, who obviously had a pretty disappointing outing, she didn't have any massive stinkers, which really this week you're going to find as a trend. Almost everybody had a handful of people who we know are probably going to be good, but just massively underperformed. And speaking of underperformance, Jules and Lara, always a perennial threat, always one of the most active on the trash talking end, just barely by 0.88 avoided the week 1 disaster of being a low scorer, which obviously we'll get to in a little bit. Now, for them, I think they did have a decent outing by some of their bigger guns. But Purdy being hurt is something they're obviously going to want to pay attention to. Nobody on the team actually ended up cracking our top 5 by position. But I mean, Chase Brown and Taylor underperformed, but not deadly. Nico was probably one of the bigger disappointments. I mean, he is pretty coveted coming out and was a first round pick in a lot of ways in a standard league setting. Detroit as a defense against Green Bay, probably also one of their bigger want-wants, and Tyreek Hill, but they knew that was a risk kind of coming into it. If you look at the bench, not a whole lot of help from Malakovs that would have really changed the pace here, although it does look like Pamela did have some options. 2 kickers, bold strategy here, because she actually chose the one that was slightly under, but you can't really pick and choose. If you get the win and you get the overall number 1, not a bad way to finish week 1. After disappointing themselves in year 2, because remember, Team Kickass is our inaugural champions. They are a former, only 2 teams can say they've won this title, and Team Kickass is one of them. They did come back with another great score. As I mentioned, less than 10 over their predicted, but that was more than enough. Now, the Raw Doggers did put up a bit of a fight, and actually, they're probably a little upset. They would have beaten most teams in this league if they would have just had a better matchup, but it is what it is. Now, also, I should say from the Raw Doggers, it was nice to actually meet the person who makes the decision. So thanks to Jake for timing in and saying hi during the draft. It was always nice. Paul is more the verbal end of things. And I'm not sure if their third member is really kind of a floating head in this situation. Certainly active on the chat group occasionally. So I think the Raw Doggers probably are one of the top 2 or 3 in terms of most likely to post. Anyway, it comes down to the actual football part. We did have some great QB actions here. So this could be a harbinger because these were 2 people that were not on the top 10 last year that this week were on the top 5. Fields being the quarterback 2, Herbert being the quarterback 5 on the week. The backup quarterback's not quite as great, although Caleb, as you can see, was pretty close and did put up a fight. Everybody else, at least on Kickasses, their defense was tied for the defense 5. 11 seemed like a common number. But again, I think like I mentioned last time, Montgomery underperforming and obviously Chase being the huge issue. Everybody else just put up. I mean, the running backs combining for over 30 was going to win you this week. In most cases, you'll notice not something that can be said by the Raw Doggers. Although the Raw Doggers did have the tight end 1. Not a great week for tight ends. No one really went off if 13.8 is our top score. And as I mentioned, their quarterback was doing okay. I do think if we take a look at the bench, we have Team IR here, so they're making some pleas for the future. Their bench didn't really put up too much of a stink here, whereas if you look at the bench on Team Kickass, they did have the running back 4 in Javonte Williams. So it'll be interesting to see how they choose to play that in week 2. But either way, getting over 130, sorry, Raw Doggers, you really did deserve a win, but Team Kickass, you just deserved it more. Now that we have 3 years of history, we can talk about the previous 2 years. And in this particular case, these are the first 2 teams ever to be tub thumped. They finished on the basement in year 1 and year 2, respectively. So coming out of the gates, they're obviously, trying to prove something that they wouldn't go back to it. Neither one really put up a massive week, but that is the name of the game. If Jackie was our 3rd highest scoring at 120, not something I think is going to get you a win in every week, but it certainly did the job here. Raph and James, unfortunately, starting off just a little bit shy. Let's take a quick look, because actually they had a few players, but this is one of the matchups where both teams rang the bell a little bit and got into the top 5. Our winner first, if you notice, a lot of trends in terms of top players in that Buffalo Ravens game. So Zay Flowers was actually the wide receiver 1 this week. Tight end 3 and Kelsey, the coveted, future husband to be or groom to be. I think the decision was made more to irk another team, but it worked out for you, Jackie. You got the tight end 3 on the week. And you did also score. We had 2 teams here with kickers. Kickers, most of the scoring kickers, the top 3 actually weren't taken. The tied for 4th here, these are the only 2 kickers on the top 5, and obviously we can see that they tied here. There's a little bit of action on the bench, but I'll get to that in a second, because on Raf and James' end, they did have Lamar, so that was the quarterback 4, kind of surprisingly. You think he would have put up a little bit more with that kind of game, but with Derrick Henry doing what he did on the ground, that was kind of, taking away from maybe Lamar's touchdown total. I think one of the biggest things here, 2 great defenses, and in any other week probably would have done well, but just matchups not favoring them at all. Even if we look, Jackie's got Buffalo, smart enough to kind of bench them, because I think that would have been, kind of a pivotal point. But one thing to mention for Jackie here, she's got some talent on the bench. Etienne was running back 5 and Coleman was the wide receiver 3. So Jackie actually could have exceeded her Yahoo, gotten into the green, and maybe made a plea for the top spot, but she didn't need it this week. Maybe she'll save it for next week. In terms of the NORCAN retirees, they're always active, but let's see how they respond after week 1. Pretty epic matchup here. Now, we both have 2 teams that used to be on their own and now have a significant partner, although I feel that Randy maybe already had this partner, but now it's just a little bit more legitimate. In terms of Kelsey, defending champion, how does she respond? Sometimes when you win, you end up being static and staying put. Kelsey, always being resourceful, went out and got herself a great teammate. I think number 1, to get someone to talk to about it. I mean, I think the last time she had a teammate, she maybe didn't have a person who was super interested in the sporting event itself, whereas I think this is not the case in Maureen. But also maybe to get into the head of a rival. I could see that coming up later on. But even more importantly, this coming down to 0.04. Obviously, this is going to be probably the closest matchup of the year. And just like I said with Bills Ravens, was this a game of the year? Maybe too early in week 1? Not really sure. We'll go on Randy's side first, just because Derrick Henry needs a little bit of attention. That was our running back 1, and not by a super close margin, but it did kind of overcompensate for a lot of the shortcomings here. Some people that I'm assuming that Randy was kind of banking on, especially people like AJ Brown. I mean, just getting that 1 catch, and that was near the end of the game and wasn't really a super pivotal moment. If you even look at Randy's bench, though, she could have. This is the hard part. I'm sorry, Randy, but anytime you lose by a small amount, you can go and nitpick. And yes, Egbuka was the wide receiver 4. That would have won you the week. Tyler Warren was the tight end 5. Although you got 2 strong tight ends, so no one can really fault you on that one. So unfortunate the way it panned out for you guys. But in terms of our defending champion, it's always nice to come back with a win, especially now. The pressure might be on Maureen, because if Kelsey doesn't do so well, the one other year she's had a partner, she didn't win. The one year she was on her own, her did win. So just saying, not trying to paint any discontent early. Your running backs were fine, but nothing super special except for your flex running back. James Cook was the running back 3. And again, almost 20 points. Normally that's not going to be a 3, but in this particular week, it was fantastic. You made most of the right choices. Not a whole lot on the bench that really would have thrown things off. And let's be honest, let's not nitpick. You get a win in week 1, even if it's just by a share, I would take it, and I really would take it. In the next little matchup, you're going to see why. Tell you what sucks about running a league with consequences and having to do a video about it is when you bounce down to the bottom, especially after week 1, there's no hiding. There is no hiding whatsoever. I will talk about 4th and Concord. Hail Vincent, you guys did a great job here. Weirdly enough, though, this matchup, you had 0 people in the top 5. You just didn't need anyone on the top 5. You still would have beaten not everyone in the league. There's a few people who probably wished you were their matchup, but you fell victim to the same thing. I mean, Justin Jefferson didn't have a massive underperformance. Your wide receivers seem to be your strength right now, although Breece Hall and Achane both did just fine. I mean, you kind of had that as you really didn't bottom out anywhere. Like, no one that got you. I mean, tight end was not a position that scored high in general, so you just did well enough. I think obviously your biggest concern is Joe Burrow, but he never plays well in week 1. And I don't know if people paid attention to this. I do as a Browns fan. He doesn't play well against the Browns. He's literally never, I mean, he's maybe had 1 or 2 games in his career against that defense that's been special. Your bench, you made most of the right calls, although, like I said, I did not say, thought of. Geno Smith actually had a great week, and Deebo Samuel came out with Washington. A lot of people were talking about the weight gain. Turns out, doesn't matter. He did quite well. So there you go. I don't even want to talk about my team. Allen was quarterback 1, and not by a close margin, by 11 points. Yep, that's about it. And we can talk about my hurt people, my underperforming people. Week 1, consequence. Sometimes I go to the standings and I really focus on how people did. We don't need to this time. You either won and you're 1-0 or you lost and you're not. So let's not focus too much on that. Even going ahead to round 2 here in week 2, I'm not going to go too crazy on the predicted scores here, although maybe them saying that because I'm clearly the only one who's not doing great. I mean, the bottom 2 here are predicted for bottom 2 again, and we know that's not going to hold, right? Anyway, tough to say we have any targeted matchups here, although just by looking at it, it does look like there's a lot of really close calls. I don't think the defending champions are sweating playing me, but hopefully I can bounce back. Only thing I'd mention is do pay attention. Injuries have already hit up, and you know they're going to keep going. We currently don't have a lot of running back issues, but you know we probably are going to. But there are already some people, specifically people in 49ers uniforms, that they're probably dealing with some ad drops. Those have already been accounted for here, but either way, always good to take a look. Who really knows? Week 2, we don't know trends and patterns yet, so let's just focus on our own team for now. Week 1 has mercifully come to a close for some of us. Now, we do have to address one key element. Obviously, in this league, we've added now. So people overseas, you will be part of the game. I'm assuming Geneva people will still try and do the round to try and get together, but those of us who are overseas, if you finish last, when you finish last, it happens to everybody. I can say by experience. I understand that not everyone can do it before the kickoff on Sunday. That's ideal. Try and get it done before the first kickoff on Sunday. But what I am going to hold us to, and I will lead by example on this one, I want you to put in the chat what you are going to do. So for instance, for me, I would have done it already. Again, you can see by the backgrounds, kind of dealing with something. A flight is upcoming. When I land in Thailand, I'll try and get it done on the Sunday. But if I can't, I will at least post on the chat which of the consequences I will be doing. Spoiler alert, it is not the vanilla ice dashes in my eyebrow. But I'll let everyone know. If I can get it done beforehand, I will. If not, I will do it as soon as possible. If we could hold each other accountable for that one, that would be wonderful. And remember, teammates overseas, you are on the hook as well. But that's enough for now. Week 1 done. Looking on to week 2, I think it's a fairly normal week. Do check your rosters because a lot of injuries kind of jumped up. Weirdly enough, not running backs, knock on wood. Let's see if that holds. But either way, best of luck, everyone, on week 2.